Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. Let me share my screen first. There we go. This is our session R09. Okay. And we're going to be, Zoom has too many things that come on. Okay, welcome to R09. This is, of course, a roundtable session. Roundtables are my favorite kind of sessions because this is where the discussions can go deeper and you can actually learn from each other and learn from this wonderful community we have here. So our roundtable today is on discussing roles of technology in learning. My name is Preeti Raman. I'm the chair of this session, and we have 3 presentations in this session. Before I give them the floor, there are a few things I need to go through. If you've been attending Salties, you know these. This session, of course, is being recorded. If you feel uncomfortable being recorded, please consider switching the camera off or renaming yourself or both. We are using closed captioning, so feel free to hide the subtitles by clicking on More, Hide Subtitle, vice versa. You can turn them back on by clicking on More, Show Subtitle. So we have 3 presentations, and the format of our roundtable today will be, we'll have each of the presenters talk about their work for about 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll create 3 breakout rooms, and the presenters will be available for you to have those discussions in the breakout rooms. You will have the flexibility to go from room to room, just like how we would in, hopefully we will soon, but how we would in a live session. So you could go from one breakout room to another and come back in. If you have any trouble at all during the process, just come to the main room. If you do log off by mistake, we've done that. So just come back into a meeting and it should be fine. At the end, I hope that we do have some time to kind of debrief and come back here. I will stop sharing. Any questions before we start? Okay, wonderful. I am going to now give the floor to our first presenters who are gonna ask us to stop scrolling and start learning through social networks.
Thank you so much, Preeti. Hi, everyone. I'll start by introducing myself and then pass it over to my partner, Guillaume, who will be presenting me today. My name is Antonia Macris. I am currently completing my Master's of Arts in Educational Technology at Concordia University. A little bit about my background. It's in communications, so very fitting. And I have some experience working in higher education at McGill University in alumni relations, program development, and connecting students with alumni for professional development opportunities. So it's a little bit about me. I'll pass it over to Guillaume.
Hi, everyone. My name is Guillaume. I just finished my first year in Concordia's EdTech program. And my background is very varied, actually. I do everything from perform as a professional guitarist to designing courseware for robotics courses here in BC. And in the future, looking to just continue to find new courseware and new curriculum for either private enterprise or for public institutions. So yeah, happy to be here to share these ideas with you guys. So should I present our screen now?
Yeah, that would be very great.
It's all about finding the right one. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we can. Great, thank you.
Okay,
Great.
All right, so we'll jump in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. Our topic today that we'll be covering with you is the topic of e-learning and learning through social networks.
Just 1 second. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. So to begin with a short overview of what we will discuss, we'll start by introducing the topic of social computing to provide some background context, its evolution for to lead toward e-learning and learning through social networks, followed by discussing elements of Web 2.0 and e-learning, and then followed by jumping into the platforms, social media, and video platforms. Perfect. So we will begin our presentation by situating the topics of Web 2.0, e-learning, and social media within the realm of social computing, as I mentioned. Oh, well, we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. Okay. So what is social computing? So in a quote by Erickson, the concept of social computing is defined as systems that support the gathering, processing, and dissemination of information that is distributed across social collectives. So where the information is not independent of people, but rather is significant precisely because it is linked to people and who are in turn associated with other people. As the definition exhibits, social computing systems are considered platforms for social interactions. However, it is important to distinguish that the focus is less on computer systems and their contribution to social activity, but instead are systems that manage information embedded within a social context. And this ultimately helps facilitate our social interactions. So this understanding of social computing displays an important link between information and identity, and it's rooted in shared characteristics of users and their associations through the groups that they form within these contexts, and the digital interconnective networks that we've built today, especially in the time that we live in with COVID. So these groups referred to by Erickson are referred to as social collectives, and these include teams, communities, organizations, markets, cohorts, and more. And it's important to note that this concept always goes back to the people, the users, the learners involved, and ultimately their needs. And foundationally, social computing systems follow a social architectural approach, which highlights the importance of going back to how the systems are designed and how they're designed from the beginning in their foundation. So these mechanisms help to transform all aspects of our lives in the way we learn, the way we work now more so than ever, and the way we play. So topics in social computing are also researched and worked on by a number of designers, scholars from a wide range of disciplines. Some of these disciplines include psychology, sociology, behavioral economics, computer science, human-computer interaction, game design, you name it. So it stretches very beyond all aspects of the spectrum. It's very interdisciplinary, and it stems from a variety of fields. Perfect. So let's take a look at a brief timeline of the evolution of social computing. So the first real social interactions were seen in the 1970s as communication and conferencing suites began development. In the 1980s, there was the development of Usenet. These were worldwide distribution discussion systems, bulletin boards, and MUDs, which were multiplayer real-time virtual world games. And all of these systems started emerging. These technologies started changing the way people interacted through computers without the polished interfaces that we see today. So the UI design that we use everywhere and that we see in our digital interactions. So it's important to note that information exchange in these earlier decades were meant for very limited purposes and across minimal industries, such as for specifically military and for education purposes. It wasn't as accessible to the average citizen to use for leisure or learning like we have today. Later in the 1990s and the 2000s, with the adoption of the World Wide Web, this brought this interaction up a notch, and it started making most of the world familiar with these social computing forms. And then from 2000s until today, examples of social computing we see are emails, discussion forums, instant messaging, formal and informal e-learning, which we will look into a bit more, and all social networks, including Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and more. And with Web 2.0, the web considers impacts of social elements of the internet as a whole, where the social web refers to the websites that emphasize user-generated content. And that's another topic we're going to talk about, the ease of use and participatory culture. So how people engage with it. So now along this timeline, we see the emergence of e-learning and made possible by social computing from the evolution of the web. And I will now pass it over to Guillaume to start us off on Web 2.0 and e-learning.
Awesome. Thanks, Antonia. So I would like to start by looking at how the internet has evolved in recent years and how these changes have led to new techniques and habits for learners. So the term Web 1.0 has come to mean the nascent internet as we know it, and we remember it from the 1990s. Back then, building and hosting a website required a lot of effort, You needed to host a server on a server for your information to be distributed. You needed experience in programming in HTML and other complex languages just to get your point across. You also had to use static images or, you know, all those ridiculous GIFs that we all remember from these annals of the internet. So again, Web 1.0 featured very basic web pages that relied on HTML, low resolution images, and annoying GIFs. In contrast to that, as you can see more to the right of your screen, we have the Web 2.0 that came out of the early 2000s and has continued to evolve since then. And now this has made it much easier for people to contribute rather than just consume. It's became much easier for people to create personal websites, and blogging, social media became a massive influence on our day-to-day lives, as we see right now. As for what's coming up next, as many of you may have understood, like Web 2.0 is already starting to become a bit of an aging term. So as for what's next, if we want to call Web 3.0 perhaps, what I see personally is that we're moving rapidly towards a web that knows what we want before we can even ask for it. Neural networks have already begun to make their way onto our phones and computers with software such as Apple's Siri, like you see here, or Google's voice assistant. And a world where we're connected not just through our devices, but through nascent technologies such as Elon Musk's upcoming Neuralink, which connects you directly to your brain. It doesn't seem like as much of a fantasy as it did maybe 10, 20 years ago. So we now need to look at how these changes in the online sphere might come to change the way that we educate through these venues. Now, e-learning has built on the technological advances that we've seen from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, whereas e-learning 1.0 was simply a distance version of traditional lecture format of classrooms. E-learning 2.0 incorporates many of the same ideals as a democratized internet. It's less reliant on top-down approach of teaching, such as having a professor just lecture to students, and instead encourages a bit of a flatter hierarchy with student involvement and collaboration. Since many of these courses are taught asynchronously, meaning that the learning can take place at any student's preferred pace, students are also expected to be more autonomous and to form their own strategies for growth. Here are a few examples of the tools that some of you may be familiar with at this point. As an educational technologist myself, I rely on these suites of tools to make e-learning more connected and engaging for the student. We use tools like Zoom and Skype for web conferencing, much as we are right now. We use participatory learning management systems such as Canva or Moodle to where participants can access course information, study materials, and collaborate on projects at a distance with other students. We also have learning platforms such as authoring tools like Adobe's Captivate or Articulate Storyline 360, and these allow us to create highly interactive e-learning courses. When looking to the future of e-learning, we see some trends that have already started to emerge. Data analytics is sure to play a massive role in the future of e-learning approaches. With the increase of digitization of educational programs and resources, we are creating and storing a truly unprecedented amount of personal data in regards to student behavior and how humans learn. Examples of this can be as macroscopic in breadth, such as aggregating test results across an entire continent, for example. Or it can be as incredibly granular as analyzing how long it takes for a certain student to do a certain part of their homework. This data can be used for many things, both positive and negative, but this includes feedback on efficacy of courses, and that makes it for a better learning experience overall. In the future, it could also be used to tailor programs to individual learners based on their behavior and their competencies, even going as far as directing their educational trajectory throughout the years. Another trend to look out for is the rise of informal learning. Whereas formal learning is considered organized and structured with explicit and intentional learning objectives, informal learning has no set objectives or outcomes and is generally classified as learning accrued through experience. Now, as a consequence, the student-teacher relationship has flattened, and with students now taking charge of their own learning, it is expected that informal learning methods will take prominence over traditional content soon. What we mean by this is that rather than read a textbook to further their understanding, students are turning towards crowdsourced information, such as videos that you might find on YouTube or other popular social media sites to become informed on a particular subject. I'm going to pass it back to Antonia now for the next section.
We're at 12 minutes, just as a warning.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Guillaume, for that overview. I will jump right into learning through social media and social networks. Do you want to go next?
Sure do.
Perfect. All right, so social media is, as we all know, a variety of network tools or technologies that emphasize social aspects of the internet as channels for communication, collaboration, and it's often interchangeable with the terms of Web 2.0 and social software. Now that we just described some of these platforms that we use regularly informally in our everyday lives, one learning theory that closely ties to the use of social media is the concept of personal learning environments, PLEs. So the PLEs are defined as a pedagogical approach for both integrating formal and informal learning using social media and supporting students' self-regulated learning in higher education context. This has also been seen in other contexts as well. The concept is regarded as an emerging technology that has a great impact on teaching and learning within education across the globe, as a PLE can be adapted to the individual learner and according to their formal or informal needs. Some of these examples of using social media for these environments include using experience and resource sharing tools that facilitate social discourse, such as WordPress, Twitter, Reddit, the creation of collaborative workplaces, and online spaces that we've created now more than ever, media sharing tools that facilitate social tagging, YouTube, Instagram, social networking sites that facilitate the social network, LinkedIn, Facebook, and adding those elements, those educational elements such as LinkedIn Learning, and adding those components in as well. And web-based cloud computing, office tools that facilitate document sharing. So that's all the Google apps, for example. So in looking at the variety of platforms available, it's interesting to note that social media platforms themselves have taken to developing in-house learning components as LinkedIn Learning. And additionally, messaging and the use of platforms will differ based on their content and the target audience. So LinkedIn will be used for business, for professional discourse. Facebook is used for community building. Instagram engages users for visual-based content and photos. So depending on what you want to learn, rather, you will engage with it differently, and as well as a user, the aggregated data around your profiles will also influence what shows up as you're trying to use it informally. And if you want to go next, Guillaume. So yeah, so in terms of formal learning through social media, some characterizing themes include openness, personalization, collaboration, social presence, user-generated content, and collective wisdom. Now, reviews on social media integration in the formal learning environments have been varied. One criticism is to use social media in higher education considers the challenge of Web 2.0 technologies and the perceptions that students that are autonomous in their learning may risk not having that mediator for their thinking, their knowledge, the monitoring of their online work. And another criticism considers fake news and addresses the issue of the learner's ability to ascertain the credibility of the online information they're interacting with and trying to judge if it's valid or not in terms of, in terms of figuring that out and making that judgment requires this higher order thinking. And on the other hand, support for Web 2.0 technologies discusses how they allow pedagogical transformation to help learners develop social learning spaces that support the creation and benefit the learners in their personalized education systems.
If we could wind up quickly, thank you.
Perfect. So that's a little bit about, are we at time? Just to check in. Yeah, okay. So that was a little bit of brought you through the evolution of the context and the historical context of social computing to Web 2.0, e-learning, and how it's influenced our interaction through social networks and using social media platforms differently, both inside and outside the classroom. I don't know if Guillaume, you'd like to add a few wrap-up words?
Yeah, well, we have another section that we'd love to delve into a bit further in the breakout room. Essentially, we'll be looking at a couple of examples of different styles of video content that have been emerging organically through independent creators, as well as how these videos can be used as a funnel for getting students into more traditional formed programs. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, please check us out in the breakout room. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. There was a real ad there, right, at the very end to come check out our breakout room. Yes,
You'd be
thank
lonely
you.
otherwise.
Yes, this is great. Okay, without further ado, let's move on to our next presentation. Paper or screen? Interesting. We are asking that question as we're on screen. Paper or screen? Current evidence on the impact of reading media on reading comprehension in health professional education. I'll hand it over to you, Ivry.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to share my screen.
Wonderful.
Okay, I think you guys should be able to see.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Ivry. I'm a medical student at University of Montreal. And I took 2 years during medical school to do a master's in medical education in Boston. And I'm very interested in the field of clinical reasoning and evidence-based medicine. And this was a project that I just ended up doing along the way. And so I'll just get started. And so I have no conflicts of interest. The work was supported by the Cercle Doyen at the Faculty of Pharmacy. So just as a general background, I think it's pretty obvious, but we know that there's a significant increase in the past 2 decades in the use of digital education at the expense of paper-based education. And so we know that students, learners are relying more on digital devices, yet the comparative effectiveness of what may be better in terms of their ability to understand and translate information is not very well known today. So reading comprehension in general, it's a pretty wide term and there's different definitions, but what we can say is that it's a multifaceted component that involves recall, understanding information, the ability to evaluate and integrate information. And it depends on the reader, the content, so the degree of complexity. So maybe perhaps the more complex the information is, the more it may challenge the ability to comprehend something. And then the actual media, which is what we're interested in here, being whether it's on a digital device or using paper. So here's a systematic review published, I think, in 2017, suggesting an advantage of paper over digital-based reading. And to our finding, it's probably the largest systematic review on the subject, in which they found 54 studies from between 2000 and 2017. And their population was kindergarten through grade 12 students, and it also included some undergraduate students, but no graduate students. And so they found this advantage of paper over digital reading. Small advantage, but still significant. And they found that it increased in time-constrained settings versus self-paced settings, and that the text genre had a matter. So meaning that they found that informational text, so what they describe as informational text is any text that has some sort of content related to it that provides some meaning or any form of information, in contrast to narrative text, which is like a fictional story. And they found that the advantage of paper over digital was found in informational text, but not in narrative texts. Perhaps one suggested mechanism is that informational text requires a higher level of processing of information. And so you're using more complex vocabulary and structures. And so the texts are, whereas narrative texts tend to be more superficial. And so there's a sort of what they call a shallowing hypothesis as to why maybe you're not delving as deep into the information as informational text, which is why you may find an advantage of one over the other. What they did not look at was whether the topic was relevant to the learner's discipline or the learner's field of study. So if the students were in the English class, was the text on an English topic, or if we're taking here an undergraduate degree, was it related to their field of study? So why would paper-based education be superior to digital? It remains very unclear, but there's been described that paper-based education has a certain physical presence to the text, so it may provide more deeper learning just by the fact that you have that physical presence. More senses perhaps being involved, so you have touch. And then why would digital be inferior? People tend to be overconfident when they read on digital devices. Perhaps there's more superficial reading. And then they also looked at experience on technology. One study looked at the more experience that students had with the technology, the less you found that gap between digital and paper, which makes sense. So what we were interested is to look at the studies that published on the effect of paper versus digital in health professional education. Why health professional education? Well, we can say that in general, health professional students, learners, residents, they have a similar learning framework. In preclinical environments, they learn basic sciences. In clinical environments, they have similar structures in that they have to go and collect information, analyze data. They have a clinical, perhaps, encounter. They have to make their impressions and provide a plan for how they're going to treat someone or follow up. So in general, we can say that in health professional fields, there is a certain similarity in terms of the structure from which students learn. So perhaps there's a difference there. So we wanted to identify, appraise, and summarize the current evidence on the effect of reading media on reading comprehension in trainees in health professional education. So our methods, we followed the JBI guidelines for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, and we have a protocol with further details on that. So the population was health professional students, trainees, residents, individually receiving educational material in their first language in a paper-based or digital-based format. And reading comprehension we defined as immediate recall or understanding of the textual content among the population. Why immediate recall or understanding? Because in general, we found that studies don't tend to look at long-term recall of information when they're assessing the difference between paper and digital, and that may be a good discussion point. And then we excluded studies with participants with cognitive impairment, reading difficulties, and related conditions. And we looked in 6 databases. And further details on our methods can be found in the protocol, but we evaluated the studies using a medical education research quality instrument, which has a lot of different components, but essentially you can see that we looked at the study design, the sampling, the validity, the data analysis, the outcomes, and that gave us a certain score, which we can rate as low, moderate, or high risk of bias. So we found 2,208 references, and in the end, we included only 10 references, which is very little for a systematic review, especially for meta-analysis here. We found 8 in the meta-analysis because we had 8 studies that had sufficient data for the meta-analysis to be conducted. So from the get-go, we didn't really expect to find significant differences because of the small number of studies. We extracted some data items that we detailed in the protocol, but we also added the degree of distraction. So was there a low, medium, high degree of distraction and the presence of supervision, meaning perhaps there's distractors in the environment that may affect the ability for students to learn. If we think about digital devices, we know that there's a potential for increased distraction as compared to paper-based media. So perhaps there may be a difference there that we wanted to try to control for. And then the population ended up being psychology, dental, medical, and optometry students, from what we found. Majority of the studies were in a controlled setting, which meant that there was a low to medium potential for distraction. And in unsupervised settings, there seemed to be a slight advantage of paper over digital. And this was not significant, but one hypothesis is that in unsupervised settings, someone is more likely to fall prey to the digital distractors. Therefore, paper-based would be superior in that kind of setting. There was an advantage of paper over digital reading, which was not significant, but which would confirm prior findings of the systematic review. But what we did find that was significant was that students in health professional education reading related texts, so texts related to their field versus texts that were not related to their field, had a small but superior reading comprehension when reading on paper than on a digital device. And the quality of evidence of studies based on our risk of bias was low. So in general, we can say that there's a non-significant difference between paper and digital-based reading. And again, all our results and findings were interpreting with a lot of caution given the number of studies that we included. But what could this potentially mean? Well, there was recently a study that spoke about the fact that evaluated whether students, the time that students spend when they read on paper and digital-based reading. And they find that when students read on digital devices, they tend to read faster. Well, if they're reading faster and they accomplish reading comprehension, then perhaps they can be more efficient at the same cost. So there's that element. And the environmental implications of saving paper, among other implications. And then we noted a slightly superior effect of paper over digital, only when considering the nature of the text that students read. And perhaps there's more investment, motivational factors, building on prior knowledge, all of those elements that are involved in giving texts that are relevant to the student. And the very little studies on e-readers, only one study on e-readers. And we can imagine in the field of digital education, it could be important to control for the different types of devices. Laptops, iPads, e-readers are not the same. Different devices have different levels of distractors. And so that would be interesting to study further. And we recommend more robust RCTs, so randomized controlled trials in health professional education, given the low quality of studies that we found. So that's about it.
Thank you.
I guess so.
Yeah, you were well in time. I'll stop. Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. So paper or screen, more to come in the breakout room. Okay, our last presentation is from McGill University, making online course materials accessible, impactful guidelines. Jennie, Maggie, and Claire.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Maggie Lattuca. I'm from Teaching and Learning Services from McGill. Sorry, I thought I was muted for a second. I had a message and I thought, oh my God, no, sorry. At Teaching and Learning Services, I manage the online program portfolio. And I'm here, as was said, with Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire. I am an online course designer at McGill with Teaching and Learning Services. And I am here also with Jennie.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm an educational developer, so an academic associate at Teaching and Learning Services.
And I am sharing the slideshow. Sorry. I can't seem to get my toolbar out of the way to get to the button that I need to get to slideshow. It's coming. I'm sorry. Here we are. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, we're very happy to be here today to talk about our toolkit for making online course materials accessible. We're here happy to share what we've done, but we are also very interested to hear your thoughts on how we structured our toolkit and if it can be used and or adapted for your own context. When we started this project in 2019, our goal was to integrate the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG, into our process for designing course materials, whether they be for online courses or put online to supplement on-campus teaching. So today we're going to share with you the toolkit toward the end of this presentation and invite you to join us in the breakout room for specific questions and examples. And also at the end, Jennie will speak to how we can stay in touch and perhaps collaborate further on this project. So first I want to start with a definition. Web accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring there are no barriers that prevent access to or interaction with online content by people with disabilities. According to the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, who develops international standards, web accessibility includes disabilities that affect access to the web, such as auditory, cognitive, neurological, physical, speech, and visual impairments. So first, some highlights about WCAG, which are important to our toolkit. We based our toolkit on WCAG 2.1. The website, the WCAG website, now indicates that 2.2 will be released this summer and will provide additional guidelines for people with cognitive and learning disabilities, low vision users, and those with disabilities using mobile devices. WCAG was developed by the W3C. It addresses accessibility issues based on desktops and mobile devices. And with the upcoming update this summer, it's good to know that this section will actually be further developed. There are 3 levels of conformance that impact design decisions: A for low impact, AA, moderate impact, and AAA, high impact. The W3C actually does not recommend the AAA. One would think that SATs would be the ideal, but it is not recommended because it is seen as extremely difficult to satisfy all of that criteria. So AA is the most widely used by educational institutions worldwide, and it's what we adhere to at McGill. However, we did a thorough review of WCAG and we decided to keep a few of the AAAs that we believed were very important to include. For example, writing out full words for abbreviations. This for us was just simple good practice. So about our process, how did our toolkit come to be in its current format? WCAG is a very comprehensive document. It covers a wide range of web accessibility areas. In our context, our LMS is certified accessible by the vendor. Many of the WCAG guidelines, therefore, do not apply to us. For example, guidelines specific to the navigation of the platform. So we took a 3-step process to producing our toolkit. First, we needed to understand WCAG 2.1. to narrow it down to the criteria that pertained to our needs, and where necessary, to translate the guidelines into simpler language. For example, one guideline was titled Reflow. In our toolkit, we renamed it to simply Scrolling. At the end of our review of WCAG, we found ourselves still with a very lengthy checklist. So to operationalize the guidelines, we decided to organize those that we extracted from WCAG by role. And we created 4 checklists instead of the initial 1 that was planned. So we have one for instructors, instructional designers, developers, and integrator/quality assurance folks. Finally, we harmonized all the checklists by creating 7 different categories where the guidelines are listed. So what does all of this look like in the end? I will turn you over to my colleague Claire, who will show you the result of our work.
Great, thank you, Maggie. So as we said, WCAG is very comprehensive and it contains multiple layers of information. So looking at this slide, which is a capture of the WCAG website, we went from this to the format for our checklist, which we have here. And if we zoom in a little bit, I'm going to provide you guys with a quick orientation to the checklist. So at the top, we always have identified the role. In this case, we're looking at the instructor checklist. And then along the side in the color panels, this is where we have identified the categories that Maggie mentioned in our harmonization of the checklists in our process. And then as we kind of move into the details of the checklist, in the next column, we have the criteria name. That is the more simplified terms that we worked on developing for the context of like online learning materials in the educational setting. And we also, for all of these, we included a sub box to reference and link back to the original WCAG guideline, so that there's always that ability to kind of go back to the source material to confirm information if needed. Next, when we go into the center column, we have putting it into practice. And this is where we try to capture the implementation of the criteria in a way that makes sense in the context of online learning materials. So if we look at an example here at the bottom with flashing media, the WCAG guideline says that you should have no more than 3 flashes in 1 second. But what we opted to write here is to encourage avoiding media that contains flashing and blinking, because this would be the simplest way to meet this criteria. And as a side note, this is another example of a AAA level that we decided to include because we felt it was important to capture in these checklists. So this is just one of our checklists. As we mentioned, we have 4 different roles, and they will be available to look at in more detail in our breakout room. At this point, I'm going to hand you off to Jennie to talk about the next steps in the project. And as she's speaking, I'll also post links to the checklist in the chat for you guys.
Great, thank you so much, Claire and Maggie. So as Maggie mentioned, we initially developed this checklist to promote our own understanding. And we have since realized that perhaps it would be of interest to others as well. So to that, or that's very much our hope. So to that purpose, one way of sharing it was via collaboration on the Making Learning Inclusive and Accessible web modules. So this was with Bishop's University, Cégep à Distance, Concordia University, Dawson, and the McGill team, with Knowledge One and the Entente Canada Quebec. So the aim of this was to develop a series of modules, and one of those several modules speaks to the accessibility toolkit that we've been sharing with you here today, the set of role-based checklists. So the modules themselves, they're really anchored in best practices. And thank you, Maggie. You're perfectly on time for the slide switching here. This is great. Thank you. The modules are anchored in best practices, and they aim to support instructors and other educators in building more inclusive and accessible courses. So we'd like to invite you to consult the modules to learn how to transform your class materials into accessible formats, to identify accessible web resources, what those look like, why we might want to do that, and to create inclusive learning environments. And the modules are about 10 to 30 minutes each. So they're kind of a nice bite size. If a meeting ends early, you can always check out one of those modules in your time. The modules themselves include accessible features, and to ensure more successful compatibility with assistive technology, the information is paced carefully and broken down into multiple slides. So I'm just going to pop the link for those into the chat. We do have it here on the slide as well, but sometimes it's handy to just be able to click right to it. So that was one way that we shared this information beyond our respective institutions. And another, at this point, we're really looking to expand the community of people who are considering using the toolkit, or who might, even if you don't use it fully, find it as an interesting tool to inform their practice. So we're very much hoping it will be useful to you as well. And that will sort of be our flawless transition into our breakout rooms here. That we very much hope that as we, prepare to go into the breakout rooms, that some of the links that Claire has been sharing here may have piqued your interest, and you'd like to join us for an opportunity to explore how you're addressing accessibility currently, whether you think this role-based approach to these focused checklists might work in your context. If you have thoughts on how the categories work, those categories, the different colored categories within the sheet for you. And finally, an opportunity to keep in touch by filling out a survey. It's a short survey, I promise. So I'm just going to put that link in the chat right away. In the event that you're torn between two breakout rooms, we'll put the link here so you can either check it now or later. And really that's, as we said, the aim to have an opportunity to follow up afterwards, to learn more from one another and just hear what works for you and what questions you may have. So with that, we'll stop sharing our slides for now, and we hope to see you in the breakout room. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, that was great, and well on time. So I will, I will pause recording. Anything from the speakers? Okay, great. Thank you all so much. This was a wonderful session. It's too bad we didn't have time to listen to some guitar music because I've been eyeing that from the start of the session.
Thank you. This is actually a real wall behind me with real guitars.
Yeah, and I hope so. No?
Next time we'll open up the Saltese 2022 with a little flamenco or something.
Wait, is that a virtual background? Please don't break my heart.
No, it's not.
Okay, it is, isn't it? Yes, and that's what I thought. Yeah. Oh, he just has the immersive effect enabled.
That's it, yeah. I spent 200 hours programming this whole thing.
Okay, thanks everyone. Such a fun session. And thank you so much for sharing your work and all the resources. See you soon. Have a great conference tomorrow.
And thank you, Preeti, for sharing.
Yes, bye. Oh, speakers, if you want to stay for a picture, that's cool. Sure. If everybody, this will be a memory. I don't think we would have, I hope not, to do a Saltese again this way. But who, do we have everyone? Yes, okay, good. Who would like to, you can take your own pictures, I guess. Feel free to move yourself around, take your own pictures. Everybody keep smiling as everybody's taking pictures. Yes, are we good? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Take care.
Bye.